Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Employee Wellbeing Breakout Session at this year's Glint People Success Summit. My name is Chad Bennett. I'm part of the People Science team here at LinkedIn, and I will be your host for today. Before we get started, I have a few reminders for our audience. Today, we are using Zoom webinars, and there are a couple of features that you can utilize to participate in the session. The first one being the chat. If you click on the chat button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can pull up the chat window and let us know where you are tuning in from. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees from the blue highlighted drop-down to line. Additionally, we will be answering your questions at the end, so please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A window at any time. You can also find this at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now that we have that covered, I'm super excited to have Jay Kullar, General Manager of Global Health and Wellbeing at Delta Airlines, join me today to discuss employee well-being and how we can reimagine our programs to fit the future of work. Hi, Jay. Welcome and thank you.
Hi, Chad. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Jay, before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your role at Delta Airlines?
Absolutely, I'd love to. I've been at Delta for about 15 years, in the last 8 years in the well-being space. Prior to that, I've had history and background in clinical nutrition education and been in the well-being community. But at Delta, I'm responsible for global health and well-being for all of our employees and have been focused on that for, as I mentioned, the last 8 years.
Awesome. Thank you for giving us that background. To set the stage for our audience, what was Delta's employee well-being program like prior to the pandemic?
Well, we've always strived to have a very comprehensive program. And a few years ago, we really did, similar to other corporations, spanned out beyond physical well-being, really focused on emotional well-being. We were starting to look at work-life opportunities and different programs that really truly make it more comprehensive. So, and we also had a large group of well-being champions, our boots on the ground, that we were really nurturing to help us in this whole culture of well-being at Delta.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so as you know all too well, the world changed in March of 2020. And with that came changes to the way we work. How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect the way you approach well-being across the organization?
Well, as you can imagine, Chad, like certainly for our industry being an airline, we were one of the industries that were most hit by the pandemic as far as revenues and the changes we need to make to our workforce, to our operations. So it was with that commitment to our people, and we've always been a very people-centric organization. We always talk about how our people are our most valued resource, and really they've led to such success at Delta. But the focus really became even more so and fine-tuned on our employees, our customers and consumers around the world, and the communities that we work with and in. So for us, we leaned in even more heavily into well-being. I think many of you listening, as well as you, Chad, probably remember way back when they were talking about airlines and air travel. We were one of the first airlines to leave the middle seats empty, just for the COVID response, but also for the comfort of employees. We were one of the first in the forefront as far as testing and contact tracing to keep our own employees safe, but also for our consumers and communities. So we're very vocal and in the forefront of all the discussions around what this pandemic means to our individual selves, the families that we support, and our consumers. So that was that was something that I'm very proud of, that our leadership really responded. One of those responses, as far as the commitment to well-being, was to hire our first chief health officer, Dr. Henry Ting from the Mayo Clinic. Henry's been with us since the beginning of the year, and he had been an advisor to our CEO, Ed Bastian, for the year prior when we started focusing on COVID response. But now he has built a team within Delta and continue to lean into all aspects of well-being.
Yes, absolutely. I know you guys have been committed. And so I'm happy. This is why I'm happy we're having this discussion here.
Mhm.
It's amazing to hear about all the programs that you enhanced and added throughout this time.
Mhm.
Tell me, what informed the actions you were taking? For example, how did you know, say, financial well-being should be included
Mhm.
in part of your approach?
Mhm. Yes, so absolutely. As you noted that we had um, many programs that we continued. I'm really proud of the fact that with this investment in well-being, that even though being in the situation we were, expense and revenue wise, we did not shy away from any of our programs. We actually leaned in even more. So you referenced financial well-being, absolutely understanding that our employees were really needing our support in this area. We grew our financial well-being coaching and portfolio, as well as some of our care and caregiving areas, including adding new products and tools. What informed our decisions was indeed utilizing more survey tools and feedback. In particular, we use Glint for pulse surveys. Now, what was really interesting to me in all of my time at Delta, we had used surveys at a broader level, and pulse surveys were something that were becoming very prevalent. However, what really was exciting for me was that we were really asking a lot of really sound well-being questions to really understand the sentiment of our employees. So our well-being surveys included questions around overall health, physical health, emotional and mental health, financial support, what were our employees dealing with. As you know, with our workforce, many employees were working throughout the pandemic. We have gate agents, we have flight attendants, pilots that are frontline working and supporting us throughout this pandemic. But then we had office workers and staff that went remote, like many other corporations, and were working from home, which brought along many different viewpoints and challenges, emotional, family life, that we were hearing those responses coming back loud and clear in these pulse surveys. So it really informed some of our decisions and really solidified the need to support our employees. And financial well-being was one of those areas, as well as work life and caregiving, as I noted.
Wow. I really love how you leaned into making sure the employee voice resonated through the decisions that were being made. That's really something we hear a lot with a lot of our clients in terms of best practices. And while it is amazing to have all of these programs in place, you know, one of the hardest things to do is get the word out about them, right? Especially given the size of your employee population. How do you ensure they are utilized by employees, and how do you measure success?
Those are really great questions. And you're right. You know, you can have the best programs and even informed by what employees want, but if they are not aware of them, or they're not easy for them to utilize or get to, then you've really missed the mark. So obviously communication is really important, and we have a very multi-pronged approach, always have. And even with that, you do miss employees. One of the most successful communication strategies was for us prior to the pandemic was face-to-face. So we had to figure out, and still, even though we were socially distanced and we weren't gathering in large groups, we had to find ways to be able to be in front of our employees and be COVID safe. So the communication planning was still robust, but we had to also augment it with different ways of communicating, adding more of becoming experts in virtual meetings and virtual sessions and seminars to educate, finding different ways, whether it be through text-based or mobile apps. I'm trying to meet our employees where they are. But so the communication planning and how to be very creative during that communication was, you know, it was definitely key. But one of the things I mentioned early on about this network, this well-being network of champions and leaders that we had already put in place that was very successful, we really leveraged them as far as continuing to communicate with them, working with them, and finding different ways to engage with our employees. So they really are our boots on the ground. We have well-being champions in all of our locations, in each of our divisions. And so working to support them. And again, that feedback loop of listening to them, because even though we get feedback from our employees, it's really important to act upon it and customize our solutions. So that's indeed what we do through this network. And then also the one thing that really helped support all of this was our leadership commitment and buy-in. We had that commitment to well-being and our programmings and really supporting our employees through this pandemic and our customers and communities from the very top of our leadership, from our CEO down to the executive team. And it was really this whole culture and commitment that really enabled us to move forward and be successful in reaching out. And so as far as what does success look like, I mean, as far as the utilization, one of our most utilized resources throughout this whole time was indeed our employee assistance program. We have a lot of work-life services, so we actually tripled the volume as far as participation and utilization of these services, but they were very broad services, and we really noticed that our employees were utilizing them differently. For instance, when at the height of the pandemic, when employees were taking leaves of absence to help support the company as we had a lower revenue stream, we were supporting them with information about unemployment insurance. When we had employees who were suffering that maybe their spouse or family member had been laid off or no longer able to work and they're in dire need, we were utilizing our EAP work-life service to help support them with all of their daily care needs. So we really utilize them as a frontier. And then of course, all the emotional needs that came along with it. So we really saw that uptick in those resources. Certainly we actually really leaned in and heavily communicated our virtual resources. We're fortunate to have already put into place digital therapy and coaching, as well as we had a really strong digital well-being platform with different activities on it, and everything from exercise to meditation to sleep hygiene. So we were able to really communicate those out to our employees, and we saw those platforms that were virtual have definitely higher utilization during this time frame. The interesting thing has really been that we've seen that we continue to have a high utilization, even as we move back to after the vaccine and the vaccination rates went up, going back to more face-to-face, we still see very high utilization of our virtual programming.
Wow, that's awesome. A lot to unpack there. I love you talking about the commitment for leadership and then the communication, all the ways you went about communicating. But the thing that really resonated was the network of champions that you had on the ground. That really makes a big difference. And it leads me to this next question. You know, one thing that always seems to be connected with well-being is this notion of burnout, right? And in 2020, one of the things we saw was burnout spiked in March, just as COVID-19, the pandemic took hold, and it continues to climb. In fact, it reached a 2-year high at the end of August, okay? Now, while organizations can offer perks to help mitigate burnout, you know, such as company-wide days off, you know, change often comes from leaders role modeling the behavior, right? For example, senior leaders often say they want to address burnout and workload issues, but they also send late night emails that, you know, make it hard for managers to unplug, or, you know, they never take vacation despite encouraging their team to take a break. How can we help shift the mindset around well-being in today's new normal so that it is an ongoing habit that all employees practice, right? From the executive team to the frontline workers?
Those are really great questions. And I mean, first of all, I mean, my comment or sentiment is the pandemic really brought forward the real need to take care of your mental health. And again, that's another thing that is a lesson that we've learned, and that I don't think is going to go away anytime soon, because I think that's going to continue to be important throughout. You know, around the world, we fared pretty well now with our access to vaccines and some of the rates going down, but around the world, you know, we're still battling heavily against the pandemic. There's so many different things that have happened even outside of the pandemic in our world, and whether it be the politics or economic and different challenges that we've had. And so burnout is going to be a very real thing that we have to tackle. But two real key themes that really have come out that we've kind of grasped is the ability and the need to be resilient, as vulnerable. And starting with our leadership team, it really comes from the very top, that messaging saying to weather out this storm and the next pandemic or whatever else may come, body and mind, we have to become more resilient. So changing the dialogue and speaking not just about our programs and tools, there needs to be beside, and then there's a layer of training, of course, but that dialogue and the messaging and the communication from that angle has to be very, very strong. And the intent is about being vulnerable, we've done a lot around sharing stories, from leaders sharing stories. We've encouraged leaders to start meetings with sharing some of their own vulnerable moments. In fact, this morning I was in a session where we said, we need to practice what we preach. Let's not wait until we need the resources to use them, but how do we incorporate well-being into every day? And a lot of it is around mindfulness. So just we have safety moments, like we're a very strong safety culture, as you can imagine, when the transportation industry have to be. But now we're saying, let's incorporate well-being moments. It doesn't have to be an hour long. It could be 60 seconds at the beginning of the meeting where everyone pauses to really recenter themselves and not just physically be there, but also mentally, and go through a breathing exercise. So we're teaching these to our managers, but also saying, we're doing it in front of our meetings or during our meetings or wherever it's appropriate. Insert these little moments and insert the stories that make it really personal. Share the information about yourself as you feel comfortable. That dialogue is really what's going to help us get through all of this together. So again, not about the programs, it's about the people, having those conversations, and then sharing the tools with our leadership team on how to have those conversations. Now we talk about, before it was talking about, there's suicide awareness, or how do you do mindfulness training? But now our dialogue is, how do you have those meaningful conversations? Going back to the basics, how do you even broach such a sensitive topic or conversation, and helping them with some modeling and some different ideas, because it's not always intuitive or comfortable for everyone, but really being in the forefront and saying, you know what, let's talk about it and let's model it and let's take a few examples, meeting them where they are, but making sure that the conversations are very real and impactful.
I love that. A lot of the best practices you just shared. And I really love the resiliency piece. It's hard to totally avoid burnout, but the most important thing is being able to recognize it, and then having the tools, resources, and understanding how to manage it. So I love how you talked about how you're helping employees, work through those times. And to stick with burnout here just for a minute, in February of this year, we reported that the most frequently cited precursors to burnout was employees feeling disconnected from colleagues. It's obvious that to build connections with colleagues, we can no longer rely on, say, water cooler talk, chance run-ins in the hallways, or in some cases, even returning to a physical office. So in that sense, the pandemic has brought a lot of long-lasting change to the working world. What has Delta done to try and help foster a connection between employees, especially for those who are working remotely?
That's a great question. So, and it became very apparent. I don't think anybody realized what working remotely, especially for the extent of time that some employees were working remotely, and all the challenges of also their other family members being at home too, what that was going to do. So we really focus on some additional support for remote work, including just acknowledging that you might have a child who's also trying to do schooling from home. You might also have your spouse or significant other also in the house with you as well. There might be a lot of disruptions. So again, going back to the dialogue of being, kind and forgiving of all of those little interruptions that may happen, being understanding that, we are work and life is merging together, providing additional tools and resources. Like we really implemented like backup daycare. Like if there's a time when you have a special meeting and you really need to have someone come into your home, take care of your child because you can't do it all, and acknowledging that fact, We did programming such as that. And then also a lot of great resources. LinkedIn was one of the ones we really reached out to, have some great content on how to be effective working from home, how to be effective in the Teams and the Zoom calls and the virtual calls. That virtual being on camera fatigue is real. How to take breaks. We implemented things like having, instead of hour-long meetings, make them 55 minutes or 50 minutes, so people have time in between meetings to go to the next one, or 25-minute meetings to 30-minute meetings. So we implemented a lot of these tips and tricks, and it became really important to try to get that messaging out to our employees that we can get through this together. And then again, having managers model it. You referenced something about the example of, when your boss or your manager is emailing you on a Saturday night or during vacation, what do you do? So we had conversations with leaders saying that, here's a tip or a trick. You might not realize it, but your employees, when they see you emailing, they have an urge to respond. So asking them or giving them some suggestions that perhaps, one tip is working on the weekend, totally acceptable, but you might want to save your messages in your email box and not send them till Monday morning, or have discussions with your team members to say, when you're on vacation, I might still copy you on an email, but I don't expect you to respond to the email. If I need to reach you, I will text you or call you. So having that reality that even though work and life are mixing, people need that time away, and they need that break, and they need the permission to be able to take that time for themselves, and making sure that your behavior is helping support a healthy work-life balance, and not picking away at it by them feeling that they need to respond immediately. So those are the things, and it goes back again, I think, to dialogue and providing resources, but you have to have that human dialogue and that mindset, and just keep on working at it and discussing it with your teams.
I love that. Especially, in terms of leaders role modeling and then setting the expectations. And that really, extends this notion that we care for you as employees, which employees want now more than ever. One of the things that we saw in, our latest employee well-being report is that employee happiness at work is down nearly 4% in the past year. Meanwhile, burnout has risen, nearly 12%. And so it's clear that employees, employee well-being is not just a fad, it's really a fundamental human need, right? Employees are looking to their organization to value their needs as full human beings, right? Not just an employee. This is the last question before we move into some Q&A, but in your opinion, what does the future of well-being look like in the world of work? How can we meet our employees where they are and demonstrate that their organization cares for them?
I have been in the well-being space for over a decade, and the one thing the pandemic did was really bring well-being to the forefront. Delta is not the only company has really leaned into the well-being aspect, and it's almost like every company needs to be a well-being company if you have employees, and you need to support your greatest asset, which is your employees. I think well-being is foundational, but now it's not just me. I believe that leaderships and CEOs understand that is at the very core of what we are, and that it will remain as foundational. And I think it will be very comprehensive and multidimensional, not just the physical and the emotional, which we know is very important, but including the financial and the social aspects. We are actually kind of evolved some of our thinking around the work life and evolved it into a new area of social well-being, which includes belonging and inclusion, and realizing the whole dynamics of someone coming to work and their life. So extending it beyond just what you would typically think of wellness or well-being. So I think it's here to stay. I think it's a foundation that you need, and making it comprehensive and continuing to invest in it is going to be something that we're going to continue to see in the future.
That's awesome. Jay, this has really been amazing. Man, I could talk to you about this for days. Thank you for all your answers. You know, we were getting close to time here, so let's see if we can answer a couple questions from the audience. Let's see here. Let me look at the Q&A section. Oh, here's a great question. Some organizations choose to not survey during these tough times, especially during the height of COVID. Do you have any advice for those leaders to encourage still conducting surveys in the midst of challenging times? You know, for example, well-being improvements could be an example of a reason why. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you have to be very careful and focused on why you're surveying. There is such a thing as over-surveying. So what we found is, you know, for well-being, people wanted to be able to provide their feelings and their responses. And potentially it's because many people were not face-to-face. I mean, face-to-face, you can engage with your manager and you can get a sentiment for how employees are feeling, but being in the virtual world, maybe not so much. But we found that we had great response rates, but I think because we were connecting those questions to what was most important to them. So when someone is working from home and you're asking them questions about how does it feel like working from home? What do you miss the most about being in the office? Then they start realizing, yeah, I do miss those conversations I had passing by, you know, and seeing different colleagues, or I do miss, you know, the after hours discussion. So I think you have to craft the questions that are important to the employees, and then you have to be responsive. I didn't mention this in some of the other piece. You have to share that, okay, here's the results from the survey, and this is what we're going to do about it. So yeah, there's such a thing as over-surveying, but if you keep them short and very, very thoughtful and strategic about what those questions are, I think is a very powerful tool. And I think every organization feels they need to have some sort of feedback. So if you're not surveying, it's one tool, then how else are you getting that input from your very valuable resource, all your employees?
Yeah, that's awesome. And that follow-up is important too. Hey, AJ, one more before we wrap up. Who oversees your champion network? You know, meetings, orientation, expectations, et cetera. Do you have like a designated person from your team to assist?
So yes, actually, it's interesting, Chad. Before we were talking about this, that, you know, the Wellbeing team was very lean. It was just me for a long time, and I did start it, and I did have some assistance from one coordinator or educator. And then now I do have indeed a manager, but the network works very strongly together. We have an executive wellbeing council, like it's layers. So we have the task force, we have a council, we have leaders, we have champions. So it's definitely structured, and I definitely have staff and managers who are supporting it, but you don't need them. You can start at a very basic level and start having the conversations and start with one meeting a month and starting to get people engaged. Because one thing I do know is employees' well-being is something that's ubiquitous. Everybody thinks about well-being or connects to something well-being. And this is one of those volunteer work groups that they want to be a part of, right? So you can start small, but that's really a really important element to your program.
Yeah. That's awesome. Hey, this has really been amazing. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted questions. I also want to thank you, Jay, for joining us today and for taking the time to chat about all the things that Delta's doing, you know, around employee well-being.